Welcome to the Brass Junkies, a podcast from the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network featuring interviews with the world's greatest brass players by two thoroughly average ones, Lance LaDuke and myself, Andrew Hitz. Today's episode features trumpet guru Fred Powell of Powell Trumpets. He tells us about apprenticing as a repairman and how the knowledge he acquired led him to start designing his own trumpets. He also talks about how he made the jump from the corporate world to running his own company and about some of his favorite moments from the many times we shared the stage with him as a part of the Boston Brass Christmas Big Band Show. He tells us all about it next. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Brass Junkies. I am your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my muse and fellow co-host, Lance LaDuke. Lance, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm feeling hypoallergenic.
Oh man. Okay, hypoallergenic. That's great. So before I introduce our guest for this episode, I wanted to right off the bat thank our two fabulous producers, Austin Boyer and Buddy Deschler. I paused on his name. They mean so much to me that I'm like, Austin. I almost said Austin Deschler, which just didn't. That ain't right. So Austin and Buddy not only do a great job of producing our stuff, but they also put up with a whole lot of crap from us. So we're actually more appreciative of how they put up with our crap. So the moral
I heard they're going to enter the Olympics. They're doing a synchronized swimming thing for the next Olympics, which I didn't know. And there's they're using their trumpets. Austin almost drowned.
What?
Trying to play underwater, and Buddy had to tell him, we need to be out of the water when we're playing, not under the water. And so it was a little bit of it's a Swan Lake thing. It's a little disturbing, but it's, I wish him the best.
Me too. All right. Sounds like something's going to go wrong. We might need to find new producers in case one of them perishes. So the other thing is, if you listen to the podcast regularly, at the top I ask if you wouldn't mind giving us a rating at the iTunes store, and if you have time for a quick 1 or 2 sentence even review, it'll help other people to find our podcast. So that's the end of the thanks and of the plugging of things. And without further ado, we will introduce our guest for this week's episode, and that is trumpet player, trumpet designer, trumpet builder, trumpet thought leader, trumpet inspiration, Fred Powell. How you doing, Fred?
I'm well. Like Lance, I'm pretty allergic myself, but that's nothing new.
What are you allergic to? To Lance's
That's
wisdom?
The trumpet part.
Pretty much everything. So that's why I wear a mask, and I look better that way too.
This is us vociferously disagreeing with you. So we have known Fred for a very, very, very long time. When I first joined Boston Brass back in 2000, Boston Brass was sponsored by Con Selmer, which was owned by UMI, and that's where I first met Fred, who, amongst other things, designed the Vintage 1 trumpet for Con, which was an incredibly popular model for them. And then, and Fred is kind of, we're going to let the audience tell Fred's story. So we're going to let Fred tell Fred's story. And also, as a teaser, Fred knows more than the internet does about barbecue. He knows everything about barbecue. So we'll pick his. I'm talking. You can call him with.
We should have a contest.
Yeah,
we'll just pick towns.
You can call Fred with an interstate and a mile marker, and then he can tell you what you're close to, what's closest to the highway, what their hours are, and exactly what you should get. I'm talking like the meat, the side items, whether you should get the sweet tea or not. It's pretty shocking. So
important stuff.
You what now?
The important stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's noon, and I haven't eaten lunch yet, so that's actually going to really backfire. But I might go get some barbecue after this.
Speaking of barbecue, you remember that time we were eating with Fred, and there was, half a dozen of us at the table, and the waitress came by, and she was picking up our plates or refilling the iced teas, and Fred was taking a little longer than some of us, and she looked at his plate, and then she said, "You know what? I'll just leave that for you." And he goes, "I figured you would."
Oh goodness. So Fred, tell us about your history as a trumpet designer and builder, and what you're up to these days.
Well, I guess, from that standpoint, a lot of people first ask me how I got into doing this. And because both of my degrees are performance degrees, playing degrees, so I considered myself a trumpet player first, and then this was, doing the trumpet design and restoration, and getting into building was something that happened a little later as life made a few of the decisions for me, as it does for all of us at times. But originally, I started out in college doing a repair apprenticeship, and that's how I actually got interested in that. It was actually a way to make some money in college because I was working about 15 hours a week on a work scholarship job, and
Where were you in school?
that was when I was at Bob Jones University in South Carolina, and I was back then. We're talking the 80s, so not a whole lot of money coming in from the work scholarship job. And then I picked up a couple of horns and refurbed them and resold them, and figured out that I could work about an hour and a half or 2 hours a week and make the same money I was working on the work scholarship job, and have more time to practice and do schoolwork. So talked to my parents and made that switch at that point. But I was very fortunate to apprentice with a guy in the Norfolk area who actually was the repairman over at the Armed Forces School of Music in Eastern Virginia, and he was at a music store, Boykins Music, in Virginia Beach, and I'm still very good friends with him, and he has since, of course, he's a really funny and sarcastic guy named Rich Brunk, fantastic repairman, by the way, if anybody's looking for anything. But he's told me now, of course, this is 30 years later, and he's told me that I was his only apprentice. Before that or after, he's not done it again. So I guess I ruined him for that. His first and only try. But then I was fortunate to get in, just learning from other guys. I came up kind of more the old school way of doing repair. I didn't go to school for repair. I actually learned from other technicians, and kind of came up more the old school way of learning repair rather than so. But tried to maintain myself as a player throughout. Went to grad school at Florida State University, did a performance degree, master's there, and soon, basically right out of Florida State, I got some work down in Orlando with a guy that made handmade trumpets. He's still around. We're still friends too. A guy named Roy Lawler, and I worked for him. I was playing and working for him at the same time. Sometimes I was on the road. Sometimes I was at the shop. Sometimes I was playing with Florida Symphony, doing different things. But I was able to be flexible with him, and I worked on and off for him for about six or 7 years, I believe, before some other opportunities came up.
So you just talked about the difference between kind of an old school way of learning brass repair and the newer way. What's the difference?
Well, there are a couple of schools out there now, and well, they've been around for a while. It's not really anything new, but you can go to actually these schools to learn repair as a specialty, and make that a profession. And that's not really how I did it. I learned from guys on the bench, and begging them to let me help them for a couple of hours, and trying to pick their brains and learn that way. So it wasn't more of a formal schooling like is available, but more of that way of passing down the traditions of brass repair. And a lot of times you find that 5 different people have 5 different ways of doing things, and that doesn't mean that one of them is wrong or right. It's just what somebody might be comfortable with. So you can learn different techniques that way of doing things and choose which way works best for you. So very, very much like jazz improv or whatever. Learning that that there's an old school way of doing that too, and hanging out with the old guys and seeing how they do things, and so we become a synthesis of all those things, all that input, and you take the best of this and the best of that, and what you learn from this guy and what you learn from another guy, and put it all together to kind of create your own style and your preferred methods of doing things.
This is not an episode of the Entrepreneurial Musician podcast, but I really love both Lance and I. Our heads were nodding when you were talking about being in school and figuring out that you had this this skill and this ability that you could work 1 or 2 hours and make the same amount of money, and and then freeing yourself up to pursue other things. That's kind of forward thinking for a college student. If I got more free time, it was because it was handed to me, and then I didn't fill it with practicing and studying like you claim that you did. So,
well, I'm not saying that I spent every available moment doing that, but I could.
We won't ask for details.
Yes.
Have you apprenticed any students in repair?
A few. Not to the level that I did with Rich, but I actually have a girl working for us now, Chloe Holmes, that has done quite a bit of that. She's actually more specialized in woodwind repair right now, but has a lot of natural ability in that. And she's also a player. She has a performance master's degree from University of Illinois. Just graduated a couple of years ago, and so she's kind of learning some of those things as well.
It would seem to me. Well, what's your take on the notion that you can get a degree in this now versus going through the path that you went? Do you think it's a smart choice, or do you feel like the apprenticeship is going to be a better path?
I think probably a mix is good. I think that you can go to one of the schools and learn a lot in a very short amount of time. But so far as practical knowledge, I think then that you have to spend a lot of time out in the field, and knowing what you're working on is half the battle. And until you have the experience in working on those things, you can still step in some holes along the way, and we all do. But different brands of instruments are made differently. They're made differently in different eras. So horns made by King in the 1960s and 1970s, you can work on those a lot differently than you can some other brands. Some other brands, if you know the thickness of the material, what's softer, what's harder, you can avoid making some mistakes. And when you're working on somebody's baby, it's important to, kind of like in the medical profession, first do no harm. And that's one thing that all of us have to learn along the way, because we've all harmed instruments. And anybody that tells you that they haven't harmed an instrument at some point in their learning curve is just not telling you the truth.
They're a liar, instrument harmer.
That's right.
I harm my instruments every time I pick them up.
Yeah.
So do you feel like it occurred to me, you mentioned that the young lady who is apprenticing with you also is a gigger. Do you notice a connection between the people who are playing a lot and also are doing repair or building, and those who kind of, I guess where I'm leading you is, I wonder if somebody who's going through a program specifically for repair, I guess my concern would be if they don't become the best possible musician that they can, then I wonder if they're going to be able to do what you can do, because you're such a good player as well as a good builder and repair person.
I think it probably depends on what aspect of repair you're talking about. I've seen some people who are not necessarily professional players who are fabulous repair techs. And for instance, there are a lot of repair techs that repair all instruments. I don't. I've never done any woodwind repair. I've always specialized. And so I think that when you talk about final assembly, is a little bit different from some basic repair and soldering.
Oh, I see.
And you don't necessarily have to be, you could be a brass player working on a bassoon, or a bassoon player working on a trombone.
That makes sense.
you're not going to be able to play every single thing that you repair. So I think there might be some overlap, but I don't think it's an absolute imperative that you be playing at that level to be a good repair tech. When it
Well,
comes down to final assembly and how slides work, that's why when I specialize in trumpet, for instance, I have a specific way of how a third tuning slide on a trumpet should work. And I'm going to have a different feel for that as a player than I would as a repair tech who was a clarinet player. So I think that's the little bit of overlap that might be where you really get into the areas of specialty. But when you talk about basic repair, I think it's very possible for someone to be a really good repair tech and not be a professional player on that particular instrument.
What about on the design side?
Well, that might be a little bit different, and obviously, I'm not going to be a clarinet designer, because I don't play clarinet and I don't know anything about them, and I leave that to the other people who are specialists in that area.
Is that why you're not a fashion designer?
There are many reasons why I'm not a fashion designer. Oh my!
Oh my!
That's a whole nother podcast.
Well, here, let me ask you another sort of related question. What qualities do you think make a good repair person?
Well, the biggest one would be probably patience. If you get frustrated and get into a big hurry doing something important, the chances of messing something up go exponentially higher.
And that's a life skill.
In direct proportion to the lack of patience. And believe me, I can speak from experience because I fight it all the time. You've got you have to leave the shop at 5 o'clock to get to your daughter's school concert that night, and you would really like to finish up this horn before you leave, but it's not cooperating, and you have to make that choice. Do I leave it and come back tomorrow, or do I try to make this thing work? And usually I've found that the best choice is to set it aside and come back and finish it up in the morning, because today it's going to take me a half hour. Tomorrow morning, when my mind's fresh, it's going to take me about 2 minutes.
You can't smoke ribs in 30 minutes, right?
No, you really can't.
Are you messing around at all with any 3D printing?
It is a possibility in the future. We're discussing some things that would possibly be available to us. I don't want to really discuss the individual parts that we're talking about.
Sure.
But,
so, well, let me. I'm not going to try and steer you towards anything specific, but is it a situation where you're looking at printing components, or you're printing an entire horn, or you're printing? Can you talk in sort of general terms where you see the industry going? I guess that would be hopefully a safe place for you to go.
Well, the technology is advancing fairly rapidly. And when you first start talking about 3D printing, your brain immediately goes to plastic. And that's where it started. But now we're getting into things where you can 3D print things out of metal.
Sure.
From powdered metal and different things. And I would not say that I'm right on the cutting edge of that technology. I'm reading about it, talking to some people about it. So I don't know exactly where we'll go with it. We have machines that are already capable of doing things the way that we do them already. Draw benches for making pipes and lathes for turning things and different things. So there's I wouldn't want to get away from making sure that the result is the thing that we always want to keep in mind rather than the process. If the process yields the correct result, then we'll take a look at it. But if the process just saves us time or saves us money but doesn't give us a good result, then I'm really not interested.
Do you see, could there be a situation where, let's say I have there's tons and tons of materials that you can print now with 3D. So let's say I bust a brace. Could I print a new brace for myself and have the design be in such a way that I can just go ahead and repair the thing on my own? Do think it will go in that direction, or you think it will remain sort of in the hands of specialists?
Well, I think some of it's going to still remain in the hands of specialists to a degree, because even though you might be able to print that part, you've still got to be able to install it.
Right.
And
Well, I
think
guess that's what I mean. Could the design be such that the braces are there's some interchangeability about them, so that the design of the instrument changes to enhance the end user's ability to make some repairs?
Yeah, I think that there's some possibilities with that. Instruments are, well, for a long time, there have been modular instruments. And so you can
Right.
interchange, a lot of trombones are modular. There are some trumpets that are modular, where you can unscrew the components and replace that component. You can change out a bell, can take the F section out of the trombone and make it a straight trombone in a convertible fashion, that type of thing. So if there's no soldering involved, there could be possibilities if you're just talking about braces that are put on with maybe like a channel brace and a screw, rather than having to be soldered. There'd be some possibility of interchangeable things like that, I think.
Well, and then I guess you could set up, there could be, each town could have a brass, like a maker shop. And so the stuff that needed to be done by a Fred Powell, you could, it could really change the ecosystem of how we go at it. And I would argue that that's going to make you exponentially more valuable rather than putting you out of work. I think a lot of people get afraid that it's going to put them out of work. But now all of a sudden you're the expert that I need to go talk to, and I think it's going to enhance not only your profile, but the way the instruments are designed and maintained, and how we move forward.
It could be. It's one of those situations where the industry is changing all the time, and even from the corporate standpoint, of course, I got out of the corporate part of the music industry in 2005 to go out on my own, and but
I'm sure you missed the corporate part, don't you?
There are certain aspects of it that I miss.
Liar.
I think the part that I do miss, to give them some a little bit of love, is I miss working with a larger number of people sometime, because we're a small shop. We only make about 2 instruments a week. We don't have a lot of walk-in traffic, and that type of thing. And so there's some aspects of that I miss, but there's other aspects of it that I certainly don't miss. But being in business for yourself has its own challenges. Sometimes if I need to take a day off and I've done something with the kids or with my daughter or whatever, or my son, I can do that. I don't have to ask anybody. However, I may have had to stay there till 1 o'clock in the morning the night before to get the work done. So there's a matter of that too. But there's aspects of that. But the music industry, even from that standpoint, with a lot of outsourcing and different things like that, it's opened up the possibility for other people to get into the marketplace, even though they may not be an actual manufacturer. And that's one of the big differences in what we do. We don't buy parts and put them together. We actually make most of everything here or in Elkhart, or right in this vicinity. I think the only thing on our instruments that is not U.S. made is our water keys that come from Wales. And
I love those Welsh water keys.
It's a real resonance with the Welsh ones that you don't get with the Irish or English or really any others.
I credit Prince Charles, frankly. I mean, I think that's...
Yeah, and I can't understand a word they say, but I know the water keys are good. But those are designed and patented by a friend of mine named Dennis Wedgwood, and so we get those from him, those specialty water keys. But otherwise, everything comes from here.
What makes a water key special? I mean, it seems like we sort of take them for granted as brass players. Why those guys?
It goes back about probably 15, 16 years, when I was working with a British trumpet player by the name of James Watson. And he passed away, I think about 2 to 3 years ago, maybe. But he had actually been one of the first 2 albums that I ever got in my life He was the soloist on it, and it was a group called the Locke Brass Consort, spelled L-O-C-K-E, Brass Consort, and he did a solo on there. And little did I know that 25, 30 years later, I'd have the privilege of building an instrument for him. Long story short, the instrument got damaged. It fell over, and he wanted me to work on it specifically. So they actually sent it second day air from England for me to work on, and included in the box was samples of these water keys. And I'd never seen them before. They came with some instructions, and he wanted me to put them on that horn, and he actually sent us enough samples to try them on some other horns. And the specific water keys I'm talking about are called Saturn water keys, made by Dennis Wedgwood. And they operate, they're called Saturn because they have a ring around it, and they operate from any direction, 360 degrees. But the best part about it is I think they make a big playing difference because the design, it would be hard to actually describe it, but there's a housing for the water key, and then there's a ball. It's much like a steel ball bearing that goes up inside, and when the water key is closed, it forms a flat surface across. So you have no protrusion into the bore, and you have no chimney going out of the bore, so you don't have any interruption in a wave that that a nodal point might hit in that spot and cause an anomaly in the wave shape. So basically, from a tubing standpoint, it's like not having a water key, like having a flat piece of tube across there. And every horn that I put it on, when we got those samples, every single horn we put it on, we could notice a significant difference in playing characteristic. And the company at that time decided not to pursue it, not to use them, or not to do anything with it. But of course, I filed that away in my mind. And later, when I started the business for myself, I called up Dennis Wedgwood and ordered those water keys and started using them immediately for ourselves. We also have traditional water keys that we use on the horns, on the standard model horns called the Classic Series. So we use both, but on the custom top-level Signature Series horns, unless somebody wants something different, the Saturn water keys come standard.
Can you explain what a node point is, or nodal point?
Well, there are nodal points and anti-nodal points, and if you see pictures of waves, they're crossing at one point and then bouncing off of the tube at another point. And what we try to do in design is create wave shape patterns that don't have big anomalies in them so that they're consistent. But the difference, most people think that waves move in a linear fashion, and they don't.
Obviously.
They do, but not in a pattern that short. And in the air moves through the horn in a linear fashion when the wave doesn't. So if you want to prove this to yourself, you can stick your bell down in a bucket of water and play a note. And I always ask people in my clinics, what do they think is going to happen first? Are they going to see bubbles in the water, or are they going to hear sound first? So what would you think?
Well, we just saw Buddy and Austin do this actually in their synchronized swimming
That's
bit.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, I hate to give it away.
I'm trying.
That's a different type of bubbles.
Bravo, Fred.
There you go,
you
Fred.
were afraid you weren't going to be. There you go.
Yeah,
See?
this is all.
It's a win right there. That's a solid double, maybe triple.
Well, you're gonna hear sound first, followed by bubbles about a half a second later, because it takes that long for the air to catch up with the sound. Because the trumpet, basically the way that the sound waves move in a trumpet is, if you think of a neon sign, so it comes on, goes off, comes on, goes off, and the entire instrument is vibrating. So it's important that if you look at a graph, we've got some machinery that we've used, acoustic measuring devices and so forth, where we can overlay the graphs of the wave shapes. And occasionally, if something is not right with the horn, we can actually put it on the machine, look at that, and tell where the anomaly is, and actually find or locate the area where the problem is happening and correct that.
What would
So
the sound of, like, if you suspected that? How would you know that from the listener standpoint, or is it more of a when you're playing it, it feels a certain way, or is it both?
usually it's either an intonation issue or a timbre difference, or both. A lot of times, timbre differences are created as a result of an intonation problem. So you'll be playing a scale, and all of a sudden, one note doesn't sound exactly right. The timbre is different, the pitch is off, that type of thing. Or sometimes on various instruments, you'll see people using alternate fingerings to compensate for that type of thing. And a lot of times, we can fix that. And on our design, the design of our own instruments, we try to just avoid that completely and create a scale that has, that pretty much goes in a straight line, if you want to think of it that way, rather than having to sidestep, play this note differently than you play the other one to make both notes sound the same. We're trying to create a situation where you just play straight through the instrument and the evenness is there without the player having to create the evenness or compensate to make that evenness happen.
Cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. How did? Well, I was going to ask you about trumpet design, but you mentioned James Watson. How did you first cross paths with him?
Well, again, my when I was a kid, my dad came back from a business trip and had brought me two LPs at the time. If anybody remembers what those were. Actually, they're coming back a little bit, so some people know, but that was my first exposure to him. Of course, how I got in touch with him to actually build the instrument was actually when I was with United Musical Instruments, which is when you and I first met. I started there in latter part of 1997, and I went on a trip to England for the company with the sales rep over there, a guy named John Adams, who took me to see pretty much every important brass player that was within 100 miles of London.
I guess I should say, for anyone who doesn't know who he was the former principal trumpet of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, the Royal Opera House, London Sinfonietta. He was the artistic director for almost 10 years of the Black Dyke Mills Band. He was the head of brass of the Royal Academy of Music, where Lance and I met him when Boston Brass was there close to 10 years ago. And he was, of course, with the Philip Jones Brass Ensemble. So, yeah, one of the most famous trumpet players to come from over there, and there's a long list of them, obviously. So anyway, sorry, continue.
Like actually famous.
Yeah, actually famous, not in his own mind. Like, yeah.
And my actual first interaction with him was at the Academy. Is we did a presentation there, and then we went out and got some lunch afterwards, and that's how the whole thing got started, and ended up building him a couple of instruments. And which was just a huge honor for me, having listened to this guy for almost 30 years before I met him.
That must have been so cool.
It was very extremely cool. And I've had other situations like that. Lou Soloff is another good example of that. That we've all listened to him.
Yes.
From Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Spinning Wheel and everything else he did. And then got to build him instruments later on, and
Jeff Connor.
Jeff Connor, Jens Lindemann, that's right. How many instruments how many do you make? I mean, I don't mean, how many different designs are there is the question.
Well, that's an interesting question right now.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred.
That's one in a row.
Boy,
hey.
This, aren't you?
I better sit down.
We've actually just started to add, we've got a series called the Classic Series, and we had a horn called the Classic early on, which then became the Classic 2, and it kind of started to gain a following. So we actually, from a marketing standpoint, decided to add to the Classic line. So we've added the Elkhart Classic, the Studio Classic, and a few other things that we're working on. So we have expanding those models. So far as in the custom series, that would be, I guess if I did the math, I could tell you exactly, but I'll give you the rundown of a few things just to give you ideas. The custom series horns are actually built to order for a player, so they can actually come in, like going to the eye doctor, and we have a series of tests that we do eliminating things as we go. And most people think they're going to come and spend an entire day doing that. But the system that we have actually allows us to do it in about a half hour with a good player. So they can pick bells, lead pipes, weights, tuning crooks, all that type of thing. So just to kind of give you a quick rundown, we have 4 bell shapes or 4 bell designs, tapers. They're not necessarily larger or smaller. They're different parabolic shapes. And with the exception of our number 4 bell, which does have a noticeably larger throat by a little bit. But we have 4 bells total. And then in each of those bells, we can make them in 3 different weights: standard weight, lightweight, or heavy wall. And then we have 2 different bell materials, and we're actually adding a third. So if you do the math, there's quite a few different bell combinations.
What's throat? Can you explain what throat is?
The throat when I refer to the throat, what the part I'm referring to is the part that enters the flare of the throat, where you would think of where the mute would actually go in, where the corks would touch.
Right.
That's the term that I use for the throat.
Gotcha.
Some people also say flare. When I say taper, I'm referring to the entire bell from start to finish.
When I hear flare, I think of Office Space.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So
When I think of flare, I think of you.
Yeah, well, of course. Or Rick, right?
You sort of alluded to it, but what's the process? So somebody wants to get one of your... Hey, this is Lance. We'll get you right back to the interview in just a minute. I wanted to, first of all, thank you all for listening. You've been wonderful. We've got hundreds of you that are listening to every episode, and that's just great. It's very rewarding to Andrew and me. And we wanted to let you know that if you're interested in helping us cover the costs associated with recording and uploading and storing these podcasts, there's a quick and easy way for you to do that, and that's through a site called Patreon, Patreon. And at Patreon, if you sign up through that site, you can pick a dollar amount, $1, $3, $5, $10, however much you want. And every time we upload an episode, your account will be deducted for that amount. And you can set an upper limit per month or per year so that if we end up uploading additional content, that you won't be charged more than wherever you set that limit. You also will get access to some free downloads and behind the scenes things that Andrew and I are working on in preparing for future episodes. So if you're interested in helping out, we'd love to have you help you. Thank you very much for listening. Spread the word. Visit pedalnotemedia.com, click on the donate button, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. And now back to your regularly scheduled podcast, already in progress. But what's the process? So somebody wants to get one of your horns. What's the process? What goes on?
Well, there's generally, I'd say they fit into 2 categories. Number 1 category is come to the shop and come for a fitting, what we would call a trumpet fitting. The other method is we've met people out in the field. We've been to a trade show. They've already had a chance to play the horns, and we work with them there. And then maybe, a few weeks after that, they've gotten their money together and decide to order a horn, and they order the components that we worked on. We keep that information. And then we build a prototype, and we send that to them for them to be able to try for a couple of weeks in their own playing environment to make sure that it's what they wanted. And if any changes need to be made, we can do that. There's a couple of rounds of changes that are included in the custom process. And then there's a hybrid way where people order the horn. We have it right now. We're at about 12 to 14 weeks on a custom order. So somebody would order a horn, and then we would put the prototype together, and then when that is ready, then they'll come to the shop and we'll do the tweaks in person. So
who's we? You keep talking about we do this, we do that. How big's the team?
I have basically two full-time guys and myself, and then Chloe that I mentioned earlier. She teaches, does some playing and teaching, and she also does some woodwind repair on her own. And she has space in the shop, so she's there a lot, but sometimes she's working on our stuff, and sometimes she's working on woodwind stuff and some other things for schools or for a couple of other places where she does sub work for them.
So how do you you play your tail off in addition to doing all of this stuff. How do you maintain?
But you don't have a tail anymore,
no,
right?
it's gone.
No, I was born with one, but we got rid of it.
Oh,
how
that's good.
how do you maintain that level of playing when you're a small business owner and you have a back order of trumpets and and of all that stuff?
Uh, well, I will say that sometimes it's easier than others, but I think that it goes back to the fear of failure being an excellent motivator.
Yeah, amen to that.
And I have stuff scheduled out in front of myself. I have a calendar up on the wall that I look at, and I have to look up at that calendar and see what's coming up and do a little bit of advanced planning. But I'm fortunate to have a space at my house where I have a studio above my garage, so I can come in here and play till all hours of the night and not bother anyone. So that's been a blessing for quite a long time. But sometimes when I've been working at the shop all day and things haven't gone exactly smoothly, or had a long day or a long night before, and it's 10 o'clock or 10:30 at night, sometimes the hardest thing I have to do is actually pick up that trumpet and start practicing. But sometimes that's what has to be done. But I also have a schedule where I basically try to do a routine and warm up in the morning, first thing in the morning. That way, if I have to pick up a horn all during the day at the shop, I'm not starting from scratch. I can pick up a horn and test it without having to do that cold. And obviously sometimes in the shop I'm playing a good bit during the day, testing horns and so forth, but that's not every day. So basically it's just a matter of deciding what it is that's important to you and doing it. I remember being at a clinic with Phil Smith back when I was in Florida, and somebody asked him a question about practicing, and the inference from the question was that all he did was sit around and practice all day long. And boy, did he straighten everybody out, because he reminded people that he had kids and he had to cut the grass and he had to go to the grocery store and he had to do everything else that everybody else did. And so he had to intersperse it with that, and he had to plan. You had to prioritize. And I took a lot from that specific clinic with Phil Smith, because I've never forgotten his answer to that question. And for him to be, at the level that he was at, in the hot seat that he was in, I thought, you know what, other people have to do it, so why am I any better than anybody else? So,
what's your playing career consist of right now? What sorts of gigs do you do? How often are you out doing that?
I do a lot of freelance work in Chicago area and Northwest Indiana. That's
what
that's some of
sorts
the
of
commercial
gigs?
work I do.
Okay, so
It varies.
in
Well,
studios?
you guys, you guys know that I'm a switch hitter as a player, so I do some symphonic stuff. I sub on some Broadway shows occasionally, and I tour with another brass quintet called the Artisans in Brass. I took Robert Nagel's place in that group about 9 years ago. That group mainly does classical and sacred works and some fun stuff. But three of the guys are college profs. During the year, we have to be careful of their schedule, and so our tours are fairly short, normally 4 to 5 days. And then in the summer, we'll often do something that's a little bit longer. But that's one of my that's one of my faves, I guess, if you want to call it that. Those guys are not only my my friends or my musical brothers. They're just they're great guys, and love to spend time on the road with them. So it's always good to get away with them. But it's a fly-in group. We all live in different parts of the country. One guy's in Texas, one guy's in Kansas, Wisconsin, Iowa, and myself. So, we've
How do you
got
book the gigs? Where do the gigs come from?
We take care of everything pretty much ourselves. Each guy is responsible for a tour area, but primarily George Doherty, that teaches out in Iowa, he does a lot of the booking. I do some, and then I do the travel planning to make sure everybody's where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there, and all that kind of thing. So, and then we have two arrangers in the group primarily. So everybody kind of has a different job, but it works. And so usually the way that it starts is we get a request from one specific location. And then once we have that specific location request, then we start to book other things around that to fill in the time that we need. So we usually get in on Wednesday, start rehearsing. We'll rehearse Wednesday and Thursday. Sometimes we'll have a concert on Thursday night, but normally it will be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes we'll have a Thursday as well. But and then I'm doing the Kenton Christmas big band tour again this year.
Yeah, we played a whole lot of gigs with you at Christmas time with that, like many, like probably over 50 would be my guess.
I think this is the 8th year, if I'm not mistaken, 7th or 8th. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah,
But,
it's been a long.
Actually,
yeah, I think it
should be
longer
closer
than that.
to 10.
Yeah.
Because my first year, I was in 7, and the first year I was in was the first year of doing concerts.
right.
There was
Well,
the
I was
recording
talking
session the year before.
I think I've been
Oh,
doing
with
it
you?
I think this is my 8th year.
I got them to hire you. I was like adamant to.
Yeah, me too.
Well,
we both
I know-
refused to go on
but
stage.
let's understand why that happens, because Lance knows that I laugh at all his jokes.
So
Somebody has to.
yeah, actually, yeah.
Well,
Fred would. This is a good. This is maybe better for the Entrepreneurial Musician podcast, but here's a good tip. Yeah, Fred could be an average player, which he's not. He's amazing, but with the amount that he would laugh at all of the jokes throughout that show, which would ignite the rest of the band, which would ignite the crowd. He could basically just like hold the trumpet and not make any bad sounds, and he would have been rehired. So. Can you think of? Well, I can remember one where I was on the mic for the final talk. I'm trying to remember where it was, but
I can tell you where it was. It was in Lincoln, Nebraska.
That's it. Yeah, with this packed house, and I'm getting up there for the final talk, and there was some guy who was in his 80s who was sitting in, like, because they're always sitting up there, right, in like the third row or something on the aisle. And as soon as I said like my first sentence, this guy just stood up and he turned around, and then he started walking out of the hall, and I because anytime that I see the high road, I never take it, and I just said I said was it something I said, and the crowd immediately cracked up, and Fred lost it. He was like he was crying. And then the poor guy, it took him like a full 3 minutes to walk up the aisle, and he didn't know that I was talking about him. So I then just kept talking to this guy's back as he walked away, and Fred just kept on ramping up the squeaks and squeals.
Let's embellish the story just a little bit. If you remember that night, before the show even started, we all knew that we weren't getting home anytime soon, because there was a snowstorm.
That's right.
That's right.
We're all very punchy to start with, and
yes.
I remember Kelly Langenberg in the back. She lost it one time before that.
Right.
But when this guy stood up, you had just been talking about social media and getting on the website and getting on the Facebook page and
Twitter.
all that stuff.
Yes.
And one of the things you actually said when the guy was walking out, after like when you wouldn't let him go, said was, "This gentleman not a big fan of Facebook, obviously." And that's the point where I think I basically came apart.
Yeah, that's actually it's all coming back like a bad dream. That was the end of a really long month. That was our final gig, and our flights were canceled. But right before we went on stage, we all started getting emails about our flights being canceled, and I really missed that.
I ended up getting on an Amtrak at 3:30 that morning and riding it back to Chicago.
Yeah.
With Kelly, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And wasn't
That's
she
right.
pregnant?
Yes.
Yeah, it's all.
There's other stories that go back with that, but if Kelly knew I told those stories and she saw this podcast, she'd never speak to me again.
You remember? Hey, Lance, you remember this interview before it got weird?
No.
Yeah, me too. All right.
No, it was just how we had to get home. But that was a crazy night. I'll never forget that statement because. But the instruction was before we ever went on that we were all supposed to have a good time on stage, so that the audience knew we were having a good time. So I took that literally.
Yeah. Well, there is.
Well, what's the point otherwise?
Yeah.
And then Lance helped me.
Yeah. Do you remember any other gems like that came out of Lance's mouth?
Well, the one night that I remember, we were in Jackson, Mississippi.
Where's the best place for barbecue there, Fred?
I forget the name of the place, but I could probably drive you there.
Oh no!
What stood out about it?
It's been a while since they took us all there after they. You remember we all went there because we had an early show. Our show was at like 4:00 in the afternoon, and we were done by 6.
Yeah.
I vaguely remember that.
And then what I remember about that night.
Start talking about how wonderful I am again.
Yes, well, that's what I was getting ready to do. We came back to the hotel and didn't have a whole lot to do that evening, so we were all in the kind of one hotel room there. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but there was an episode of The Twilight Zone that came on the TV, and you turned the volume down. The entire episode, you made up the entire episode with the volume down, and of course, by the end of the night, every cartilage in my ribs was sore. I couldn't breathe from laughing, but
I'm sure
I heard nothing.
Totally, I don't remember that at all, actually.
Yeah, I remember nothing about the episode. Yeah, I just remember you doing that.
Yeah, I remember that one night on the road when Lance was being a jackass. Yeah, that I'm remembering that now too.
I just remember that was a lot. It was just a lot of fun. Had a lot of fun.
I was dropped on my head a lot.
The other one that I remember is when we were in Pennsylvania, and you were what was the guy? I forget it was the bass trombone player. You referred to him as Badger, I think.
Badger, Chris Madden.
Badger.
Yeah, and then I remember something happened in rehearsal, and I don't remember what it was, but he messed up a line or something, and it got quiet for a second, and you said, "Badger in repose."
That's right.
Yeah, that one I've never forgotten either. For some reason, it just stuck in my mind. But Badger in repose.
His wife Erica was on that gig too, which I think she appreciated that as well. So she was auxiliary percussion. So.
Do you remember that? Am I bringing back stuff?
No, I totally remember the Badger in repose. I also appreciate that. I should keep track of. Actually, I don't have to keep track of National Talk Like a Pirate Day. But one of my songs involves singing like a pirate, and usually on National Talk Like a Pirate Day, I get a very nice text from Fred wishing me a happy National Talk Like a Pirate Day.
That's true. Actually, that is true. And the things that happen when you singled out the people in the front row for doing a song. Well, now you, sir, or now you, ma'am, and just never know. What was going to happen, that was always the best thing, because you just never know if somebody was going to really ham it up or if they were going to completely fold in the floor. So that was always fun.
So if you could eat one meal of barbecue anywhere in the world, where would it be and what would you order?
Well, I was just actually having this discussion with your tuba teacher the other day. Because I
Which
had just
one?
Been Sam Palafian.
Oh yeah, that name is ringing a bell.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's kind of new on this.
Is he still playing?
He's also kind of a barbecue hound,
Mm-hmm.
and but the place that I referred to as my death row meal, if I ever ended up in death row.
Well, the place for your death row meal would be prison, right?
Yeah. It's just in case. I'm not saying that I did anything. I'm not admitting that I did anything.
Are we going back to that train ride again? I don't.
Anyway, it's a place. And Sam's actually been to this place too, but it's in my hometown. I grew up around this place and been there since like 1938. My mom grew up there too, but it's called Ralph's Barbecue in Weldon, North Carolina. And you don't have to choose, because you just go and get anything you want off the gigantic buffet. But it's a very specific barbecue to that part of North Carolina. You get it. It's a minced barbecue with a vinegar-based sauce that's cooked into the meat, and you get it in that part of North Carolina for about an hour and a half radius. And then when you get over to Lexington, North Carolina, the barbecue kind of changes to more of a red sauce, and it's also good. Don't get me wrong, I love that too. But yeah, if I had to choose that one, probably Ralph's Barbecue and the Minced Barbecue. But everything's great there. It's uh, and you got to have the Brunswick stew and hush puppies along with it. That's what you got to make sure to have there.
Yeah, I'm a fan of a good Brunswick stew.
So we could have. That's like I said. That's a whole other discussion too. So.
Well, this it's good that we're getting to the tail end here because Skype is conspiring against us here. We understood all that, but the connection's getting a little weak. So, well, of course, we wanted to give you the opportunity to our dear friend Jens Lindemann. As you know, all the things that he's been dealing with, on a personal level with the chop problems and et cetera. So we were wondering if you had any words of encouragement for him.
Well, it's nice that you bring that up because, he was so considerate and compassionate, sending me some emails back when I was not having chop problems. So it's good. It's good that, I can return the favor. But I guess what I've been hearing is he's having trouble playing anything below forte. and I think also I've heard that he's having trouble, playing anything in the staff or below. And so, as far as if I gave him any advice, I guess, I'm not really sure. There's been a couple of times where I also noticed, and this was just my own personal he really couldn't stay in one place on the stage when we were playing. And I'm not sure if that's contributing to this condition or not, but if he's got the whole marching band thing going, he may need to work on just staying in one place and just getting it solid on the chops, because I think that moving around, jumping around, and trying to do the splits on stage and all that might be contributing to this chop anomalies.
That chop anomalies.
It's actually his next album is called Chop Anomalies.
It's called what?
Chop Anomalies. Yeah.
If he wanted to come spend some time, we could work on it. But that, and I'm just operating on what I know from the information I'm hearing. So.
Jens is in charge of Skype today. He knew we were talking about him, so he started.
Yeah, I think so. We've even reset the call. Yeah, it's love you, Skype. Really. I mean that.
I think that's him trying to call in now.
Yeah. For those of you who have not heard the episode that is just Lance and I back, I don't know, episode 6, episode 7. The entire inspiration behind us making fun of Jens for his imaginary chop problems is that way back in the day when Jens would play every year with Boston Brass on these Kenton big band gigs that Fred has joined us with for years, and Jeff would send out one email to all of the people that were filling in the band all around the country, which would be a lot of brass players. And every year Jens would choose one lucky person to reply all to, where he would accidentally, in air quotes, reply all. And it would always be a trumpet player. And he would always say that he had heard about their chop problems and that he wanted them to know that he was there for them, for support, et cetera, to help them work through it. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I believe that Fred was the very first recipient of the quote-unquote accidental reply all, which he was having no chop problems whatsoever. But Jens emailed to about 40, professional brass players that Fred was having chop problems. So that thread got spicy quickly. So, but that's why we ask every guest now. So Fred, you inspired. And Fred, actually, because he's such a good friend, told us before we started that he has not listened to a single episode of the Brass Junkies, which we wanted to thank him for. Yeah, thanks, Fred. We have really good numbers in spite of people like you.
I know you're not in the car a lot driving and have lots of spare time to listen to stuff, so I can understand.
Yeah.
Why.
Okay. I have no reply and no excuse for this.
And actually, to get you back, we're not even posting this.
I'm sleeping sometimes, so.
Yeah, we're not even posting this. This is just like, we're just letting you think that you're a guest on the podcast, and this is never going to see the light of day.
There's actually no podcast, Fred. We don't even have a show. We just wanted to talk to you.
He didn't even verify that the Brass Junkies is real. Yeah.
It was like you had already called and I'd already accepted, and then when you found that out, you couldn't retract, and we just had this.
Yeah, we have a podcast, sure. Andrew, what's a podcast?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. How hard can it be?
Just so you guys, don't feel bad.
Oh, we don't.
You're not the only one that I haven't listened to.
That doesn't make me feel bad.
Yeah, that doesn't make me feel any better. So
I'm sorry. It's going to be J. Fred in repose now.
Yeah, there you go. If James Watson had a podcast, you'd listen to it.
Yeah, he would.
Yep.
Yeah, and that would be really interesting now.
Yes, it would. Anyway, moving along.
Yeah.
So Fred, if
our next guest, Louis Armstrong.
Yes.
Big spider back.
Yeah. So, where can people find you online, Fred?
Well, we're putting up a new website. It's down right now, but hopefully it'll be back up very shortly. But we're just powelltrumpets.com.
Okay.
And if anybody needs to email me with questions or wants to call or anything like that, they can reach me. Probably the easiest way right now until we get the email working is my email address at AOL, which is brassdoc2@aol.com.
Okay, and it's going to be a few weeks at least until this episode goes up live, so be sure to check out for powelltrumpets.com because it may very well be up by the time anybody listens to this, which might also be months later. So,
Or never.
Cool. Yeah, do you have any parting words of wisdom for all your fans?
My fans? Both of them. They would be my parents in Virginia, I guess. But parting words of wisdom, no. But just thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed and talking to you, and I was just trying to. I was telling Lance the other day that there was a publication that was talking to me about doing a thing about my duality of roles in the industry, and they were just referring to me as being two-faced. So I'm not sure how that how that plays. Not sure if I want that out there, but
well, you just put it out there.
It's not on us.
Yeah.
Well, just meaning musician and industry.
Well, we would edit that out actually if you had ever bothered to listen to a single episode, but since you haven't, now that's staying in.
You're gonna leave it in.
So
we're gonna lead with it.
Yeah. Yes. Then this week's interview is with the two-faced Fred Powell.
Yeah, well, the two faces of Fred Powell might sound a little better than the two-faced Fred Powell.
We write it down and we record multiple versions, and whichever one sounds worse, we'll go with. So that'll
lowest common denominator, right?
You can bank on that. Yep, absolutely. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Fred, for talking trumpet repair and design and playing, and for laughing at all of Lance's jokes, even the non-funny ones through the years with Boston Brass. So,
yeah, well, if we can be of any help or assistance, let us know. We don't. I guess the parting wisdom that I would leave is we don't really participate in the fringe area of the industry. We work for musicians, for working musicians, and are people that are serious and need their equipment to work every night when they walk out on stage or in the pit or whatever. And we're not really game players and snake oil salesmen and stuff like that. We try to keep it real. So,
speaking of keeping it real, I forgot that to mention that you're on the board of directors of the National Trumpet Competition, which, as I like to say, is the most intellectually honest of the brass festivals, because anytime you get any large number of trumpet players together, it's a competition, and the rest of them, like ITG, they don't just come right out and say it. So. You just kind of have your high note contest, and then everybody goes home, right?
Yeah, that is one of the things that my association with NTC has been. This is actually our 25th anniversary going into 2016, and Denny Edelbrock and myself are the only two founding members that are left. So we're
because you've killed and eaten the others.
Yeah. Well, we actually have 10 people on the board, and it's really an important organization. It's very, very different from ITG and serves a different role. It's very much kid-centric, and it is very centered around the participants And we have a lot of college profs that are definitely involved with us in the judging and so forth. But at all of our events, we only have on an average year, we'll probably have about 5 to 6 guest artists and clinicians. So it's a very small list of clinicians, but what goes on there is very much centered around the kids and the participants. And the people that are on the board, it's just an amazing group of people. Whiff Rudd, Mark Clodfelter, Rebecca Wilt, trying to remember everybody on the spur of the moment, but Tina Erickson, of course, Denny, a younger man that I've actually known since he was a student at George Mason, Marvin Haynes, has been with us since he was actually in school, and once he got out and working, he decided to hang in there with us and to be a part of that. So it's just a real joy to be associated with that group of people. It's an amazing. Terry Everson's in that group as well, and it's just an amazing time when we get together and meet. The brain power that's in that room is very humbling to me. But what we've been able to accomplish is actually to become the largest annual trumpet competition in the world. So there are some bigger competitions, but they don't happen every year. So it's been a thing that I'm definitely very proud of that association, and very grateful to have been around since the beginning.
25th anniversary is making me feel old because Boston Brass performed at the 10th anniversary. So yeah, that was a few years ago. So
exactly.
All right, Fred. Well, thank you very much, and that is going to do it for another episode of the Brass Junkies. You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to help support the podcast in order to make more episodes like this one possible, please visit pedalnotemedia.com/donate for more details. Also, be sure to check out our latest recording, The Brass Recording Project, at brassrecordingproject.com. The Brass Junkies is produced by Austin Boyer and Buddy Deschler of the Fredericksburg Brass Institute. Executive producers are Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.